My name is Jack McCabe, and I am the CEO of McCabe Research and Consulting. I'd like to welcome you all to the Real Deals Broward Development Seminar. We have a tremendous panel with us today. While they're all South Florida based, they all have international reputations. And let me start by a little bit about what our panel's about. We've seen a lot of investors and developers that are now looking north of Miami towards Broward County. With the Miami-Dade pre-construction market now showing some signs of possibly leveling off, Broward seems to be stepping up. The current building boom cycle has an impressive 80 new condominiums announced in Broward County out of the 343 in the Tri-County area. That equates to 8,562 units in the work in Broward County, a nearly 20% share of South Florida's pre-construction condos. The reason for the uptick, well, I think we're all pretty familiar with it. First off, Miami has become extremely expensive. We have some building sites still available along the waterways in Broward, and we're seeing a lot of activity. And where Broward, I think, appeals more towards the northeastern United States and to northeastern Canada, Miami seems to be somewhat dominated by Latin American buyers in Eastern Europe and even Russia. So I'm going to start off first off by announcing our panel. Brad is the owner of Premier Developers, Riva, in Fort Lauderdale. Brad is a fourth-generation builder and a very successful family of builders. They've completed more than 2,000 homes in Florida. Some of their best-known developments include Bellaria in Palm Beach, the Renaissance in Hollywood, and La Rive on the Intercoastal in Fort Lauderdale. He is currently working on Rive Fort Lauderdale, a 15-story residential tower. Michael Hammon is Senior Vice President of Related Group. Mike is returning to Related as Senior Vice President. He's responsible for executing the residential development, redevelopment, and marketing strategies for the company. Scott Leventhal is co-founder of the Trillist Companies. Scott has spent nearly 2 decades in the real estate development business and has created a portfolio of mixed-use and multifamily housing projects in the southeastern United States. He is the developer behind the massive 65-acre mixed-unit development Metropica in Sunrise. Next to Brad is one of the top architects in the world. This is Kobi Karp. He's principal of Kobi Karp Architecture. Kobi's one of South Florida's most prolific architects. He founded his full-service architectural and interior design firm in 1996. The firm designs everything from large-scale high-rise condominium and hospitality projects to small-scale, low-rise residential projects, as well as commercial developments. Kobi is the architect on the proposed new Four Seasons condo hotel in Fort Lauderdale. Down at the end is Carolyn Block Ellert. Carolyn is the founder of Premier Realties, Premier Sales Associates, Premier Sales Group, I apologize. One of the top condominium sales group representatives in South Florida. Carolyn co-founded Premier Sales Group, and they specialize in representing luxury condos, condo hotels, and condo conversions. She is chair of the Broward Master Brokers Forum, an invitation-only group comprised of South Florida's most prestigious brokers. If you would, please give a round of applause to our panel. Awesome. Okay. In the past, Broward has sometimes been seen as the middle child between Miami-Dade and Palm Beach counties when it comes to development. Over the past year, the county has seen a marked increase in both residential and commercial development. I've got a list of questions that I'm going to ask, but first, let me start with Brad. What do you see going on in Broward County right now? Where do you think we are in this current building boom, and does it have legs to stand for a few more years?
It's a couple different questions. First of all, I don't like to call it, and I don't think it is a building boom. What we're seeing in Broward County is just a tremendous growth And it's been a gradual growth that's been brewing, and it's come through, and over the last 15, 20 years, there's been a great change in Broward County in general, and in Fort Lauderdale and East Broward in particular, that while in the last decade there was a stagnation that stifled it, the growth in Broward, what you're seeing now, is not just a function of real estate or just a function of tourism, as it traditionally had been in the past, and as you said, the stepchild between Miami and Palm Beach that Broward has always seen. Today, Fort Lauderdale in particular, and Broward County as a whole, have come into their own. It's become an attractive destination for young professionals, for what's known as the creative class. It's become, there's more and more tech companies, more industries beyond the real estate and tourism that were always, and real estate and tourism, there's a third, and marine, that were all that the county had. Today, I just saw for the first time we were named one of the top 50 tech cities and ranked ahead of Miami as cities for tech companies. So it's not that a building boom is happening in Fort Lauderdale. It's that Fort Lauderdale's changing. It's an entirely different place to live. And the real estate market, the development, the luxury developers, the rental developers are discovering it and are just catching up to what's happening here.
Great. Scott, what's your take on the market right now? Are we in a boom, or are we just in a period of sustained growth you expect to keep up for a period of years?
Well, I think it's almost a little more analogous to say that instead of being the stepchild of Palm and Dade County, that Broward's really the middle, just like a building that usually sells from the top and bottom right into the middle. We have really no room to grow in South Florida other than in Broward County. And over the last several years, we've seen tremendous infrastructure improvements between improvements to Interstate 595, expansion of the Fort Lauderdale Airport, and more corporate relocations that are considering their home in Broward County. I think that housing is going to continue to follow the infrastructure, and as the South Florida region has continued to be a very strained area in terms of infrastructure, the natural evolution is for people from Miami to make their way north, and Broward is an ideal destination.
Mike, Related Group has probably been the #1 builder of multifamily down here in South Florida, but generally has focused more on Miami-Dade County in years past. Now the company seems to be doing a lot of projects in Broward County. Why are you guys building them in Broward as opposed to just in Dade?
I believe, that statement you said is true as it relates to condominiums, but on the rental side, if you go back over the last 20 years, Related has probably built more rental units in Broward County than they have in Miami-Dade County. And there's reasons for that. The availability of land and the cost of land has always been less expensive in Broward County. And we continue to be very active in Broward County in the rental market, even more so than in Miami-Dade County. I do think you're going to see a surge on our part of doing more condominiums in Broward County. We have several in the planning stages. We recently just finished a building down in Hallandale that is closing now. It was completely sold out, and we just launched another deal down in Hollywood that's doing very well in reservations. Up in Fort Lauderdale, we're starting to launch several jobs, and we feel very good about the market. One of the things that we looked at is we went back to the previous cycle, and when we compared what condos were selling oceanfront in Fort Lauderdale versus Miami Beach and Sunny Isles, the difference was 10 or 20%. Today, that difference is 100%. Units in Sunny Isles and Miami Beach are selling for twice what they're selling up here. So we feel there's a gap there, and that gap is going to close. So, this would be, if I was going to buy a condo, this would be the time I'd buy one in Broward County, just because we think the values are going to go up, and that gap is going to narrow between Miami-Dade and Broward.
Great, thank you. Kobi, is there a difference in designing buildings for Fort Lauderdale than there is for Miami?
That's a good question. I think we can all agree that Fort Lauderdale has unique districts and destinations to it. And so does Broward County, which are unique and different than Miami. I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and when I came to Florida, most people from the Midwest would rather go to Broward County. Specifically, though, Fort Lauderdale has really matured very nice. You can go to the river and see the districts which have been created and are being created. And the design is an important element. The architecture of whether it's related or whether it's what Aussie Symbol is doing on the river and other people, it's very unique. And when you go along the river, which is a very public kind of a promenade district, it relates also very well from an urban planning to, for example, how the beach is. Where the Elbow Room and all those places used to be when I came here for spring break, we're building, you know, the Conrads of the world and a Burj and Four Seasons. But what's interesting is all of those places are really unique destinations that create a public space and a public realm along the beach, along the river, in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and actually in other locations in Fort Lauderdale. For example, if you look at the districts which are being created, even by Sawgrass, what Metropica is creating, or when you look at places in Hollywood that have been created, where they take the existing fabric of the architecture and the buildings and create neighborhoods and communities, because most folks who live in Hollywood don't necessarily go to Hallandale. People who live in Fort Lauderdale in the historic homes don't necessarily go to where I like to hang out, Lauderdale by the sea, by the pier. Everybody goes to their own different districts and neighborhoods. And observing that in Broward County, it's really coming to a very mature, cultured destination. The people of, you know, if just the arts and the culture that you have in Fort Lauderdale and Broward County, manners, community, compared to the river, compared to downtown, you have a lot of opportunities in various locations to live and to work. And I think that really makes the design opportunities greater, if you will, in Fort Lauderdale, and also different, mostly different than they would be in Miami.
Thank you. Carolyn, you're in the front lines. You're dealing with the buyers. What are the differences in buyers in Broward County compared to Miami-Dade and Palm Beach? And would you say Broward's more in line with Miami or more in line with Palm Beach?
Neither. I would start with Broward is really its own unique market, although we do have crossover, probably much more this year and the tail end of 2014. A large part of that is due to what Mike had mentioned. We talk about price point. It does cost not half, but 3 times less to live in Broward County, and that's everything from property values and taxes. So all of those are huge, huge factors. But the buyers are very different, and I think what buyers are looking for, and we talk about Broward County as a whole, but there are so many unique parts of Broward County. We're focused on the big boom that's going on in Fort Lauderdale. Those buyers are truly, it used to be that Fort Lauderdale was the jeans and sneakers town, which was your billionaires are walking around in khakis and loafers and coming off their boats, and you wouldn't know one from the next. And I think the upscale buyer is emerging as a result of what opportunities are available to purchase, both in livability and in serviceability when we look at all of the global brands that are arriving.
Okay, thank you. The land costs we know are considerably less in Broward County, both historically and currently. The lifestyle and the demographics are also now changing in Broward County as well. We're seeing tremendous population migration to the area right now. I'm expecting 200 to 275,000 population gains in Florida per year. We're going to see a large portion of that down here in South Florida. That should go on for the next 15 or 20 years, provided no recessions, and of course, hopefully we'll continue to evade the hurricanes. But how are the lifestyle and demographics in Broward County changing, and how does that affect your building?
I'm not sure that it's changing as much as you just said, as much as more and more people are realizing what it's like in Fort Lauderdale and in Broward County. Fort Lauderdale has everything that's attractive about Miami. Fort Lauderdale has, but just a little less. It's a much more livable lifestyle. It's a much better scale. And for people who don't need the status of saying Miami. Fort Lauderdale is where they wind up moving to. The bigger impact that I see is not who's coming to Fort Lauderdale, although that's important. We're seeing more Latin American buyers. We're starting to see, while that might be lessening down in Miami, it's because there are fewer Latin American buyers and a higher percentage of them are looking in Fort Lauderdale and in Broward County. But you're also seeing, on a micro level, a migration back to East Fort Lauderdale. What happened a generation ago of the move out to Weston and the move to the suburbs, which was really spurred, it's always existed, has been undone. Families, young families are growing up in Fort Lauderdale and staying in Fort Lauderdale. And from the Tri-County area, younger people are moving to Fort Lauderdale and staying there. You know, there's a whole lot of stats that do it, but for me, it's the anecdotal data of baby stroller index, as our city manager loves to call it. And we see more and more young families in Flagler Village along the waterways, even on the beach. That is really the heart of what is Fort Lauderdale. And that's keeping property values up, and that's what is making it a more attractive place for the people who are discovering it now.
Scott, who are you targeting for buyers of your projects?
Well, I'll tell you, we've talked a little bit about that the Broward market's not been heavily supplied by the Latin American consumer, and I actually would argue to the contrary. We've actually seen a significant amount of Latin American sales come at you at Metropica, particularly over the last 4 months, and understanding from them that what they're really seeing of the development activity that's going on in the Miami-Dade area with continued inflation in foreign currencies, they're seeing more of a safe harbor to make an investment in Broward and to purchase at Metropica because they see less competition, they see less risk for future devaluation of their unit, as well as less risk from other buyers coming in and potentially renting out their units. So we are seeing a steady Latin American consumer, and many of which are looking for truly a home to live in because they see the great lifestyle and the amenities and the features that we offer, and expect that trend to continue over the next, hopefully, significant period of time.
So you're definitely seeing more Latin American buyers moving up and not necessarily only considering Dade, but are now looking in Broward County.
I think that with 120% change in foreign currency, probably 40 different projects to consider buying at when you look in the Miami-Dade area for the discerning buyer that's looking to move their money outside of Latin America into the United States, they're really considering Metropica and other opportunities in Broward as a great place to be because of less perceived risk on their investment.
Okay, great. Mike, the last boom bust that we had last decade was inspired by toxic loans, by investors, both affluent and non-affluent, that were able to take out mortgages considerably greater than what their income justified. Now we've kind of been in a totally opposite end of the spectrum where it's been very difficult to qualify for mortgage money, and a number of the sales over the last 3 years have been all cash deals. In fact, I think in Miami-Dade it's still running better than 50%. It was as high as 70%. What are you seeing in buyers in Broward County? Are we finally reaching out and attracting the primary buyers, owner-occupiers, or are these still primarily investors we're seeing?
I think it depends on the market. In our jobs in Hollywood and Hallandale, where they're selling in the $500 to $600 per square foot range, there we're generally getting a very heavy mix of Latin Americans. And again, a lot of this is because you have to come up with a 50% deposit, often a year or 2 years before you can close. So in many cases, these are end users. In some cases, they will sell to probably an end user. When you get to the very high end, the over $1,000 a square foot, that's when I think we tend to see more of a mixed demographic, meaning more New Yorkers, more Canadians, more what have you. And again, I don't think that trend is going to change as far as financing. I think it's holding that almost all developers are getting the 50% deposits during the construction period. And I think that's one way that this cycle is certainly very different from the last cycle, that sort of gives us a cushion if there was something to change. And, you know, I think as long as that holds, I think we feel very good about where the market is.
Do you have any concern with the devaluation of the monetary system in Brazil and Venezuela and Ecuador, Russia, that a lot of folks that were very wealthy 3 years ago don't have near as much money now, that could create a problem for us?
We believe most of those individuals have already gotten their money out or have their money in other investments. And then the question that we typically ask on the sales floor is, well, do you think your currency is going to be stronger than the US dollar a year from now or even 2 years from now? And the answer is almost always no. So at that point in time, I think most of them feel comfortable going forward. Again, it's a concern, but so far it hasn't been a problem. And just recently, we've closed 300 units in Miami. I think we're up to 70 or 80 in our Hallandale project, and so far it has not been a problem.
Okay, great. Kobi, what are your concerns about this market? I mean, you picked here to live and to reside and build, and you built an international reputation for your designs. What do you see ahead in Broward County's future, say for the next 5 years?
I'm optimistic because I have been optimistic about Broward County. I think it is a gentle growth, and I like the direction that the municipality, both the county and the city, are taking. I like the treatment that we are receiving there. I like the interaction with the municipalities and the thought process. I think that they're creating values, whether it's in Hollywood, of a project that we are starting construction, or in Fort Lauderdale and other locations. I think that right now what I'm seeing is that the actual municipalities are pushing a gentle, proper growth into those areas, which creates an opportunity because, like everybody else has mentioned here, we're looking to create a value. So the value is not only the building, it's not only the actual assets that we provide in the building, but it's also the opportunity, if you will, to come down and be able to walk in your neighborhood and wine and dine and find your local services there. So in Broward County specifically, I see that. And you can see by the neighborhoods that are coming online, like Flagler was mentioned, the river area and so forth. So I'm optimistic about that. I think that it's a culmination of bringing these thoughts and ideas together, and that's critical.
Carolyn, where are you seeing the development in Broward County? And one question I have is, how many local residents are buying into the new construction? I mean, it seems to me that 90% of the new construction is unaffordable for 90% of our population we have here, and most everything is being built for outside the state and for international buyers. What are you seeing?
We've had an incredible year and a half driven by all of the international sales. All of a sudden, our largest market, our largest local national market, they don't mind putting up their 40% and 50%. Last year, the year before, they had such anxiety from a credibility standpoint. It wasn't so much the ultimate dollar value of the investment, what will happen to my new construction funding. We are all of a sudden, and it's really been a huge, and I see this, it is not just Broward County, although Broward has just tagged on to what started in Miami. A lot of locals, all of a sudden, whether it's they are end users, whether it's primary, second, third, fourth, fifth, it certainly is what they're considering their main homestead. Very excited about the market from a local standpoint.
Okay. I think this is a great question for you guys because I know it's been very difficult for developers to acquire construction financing, and that really, I think, kind of spurred the 50% and more deposits to actually substitute for the lack of construction loans to most developers. But what are you seeing now as far as construction financing? Is it finally starting to open up?
Yes, it is. Yes, I find that there's a very active marketplace for construction financing, but I also want to point out, and this part answers your question and part responds to count. I found over the last year and a half, I've got one project, and so it's a small sample size, only hundreds. Most of our purchasers actually have been, over the last year, the local buyer. Maybe the fact that we're at a 35%, not a 50% deposit is what created that difference. But we have found over half of our sales have come from within Broward County, and they're permanent residents looking for a place, usually coming from out west or from the suburbs, coming back into the heart of Fort Lauderdale. So we've also, that leads into the fact that we've been, despite being a 35% deposit, the construction financing is there today. Lenders are much more comfortable. They don't need to see the 50%. And I think we'll see, as long as you've got a discerning by provable sales, proof sales, that the construction financing is available.
Scott and Mike, I'd like to ask you kind of went dead there. Scott and Mike, I'd like to ask you the same question. What are you finding as far as being able to acquire construction financing for your projects?
I do believe construction financing is, it's been available over the last couple of years and is becoming more so available. Obviously, lenders have mitigated their risk by 50% deposits from buyers and significant pre-sale requirements. I believe that it first started off with a little bit more opportunity funds that were making loans, and then it started to filter its way into conventional banks, and more banks are making straight loans on new condo construction. And I see a continued abundance of that capital to build as long as the sales are there and the deposits are there.
Mike, how about with related? I mean, it was...
I would agree with what the other gentlemen have said, that on the condominium side, financing has generally been, pretty steady as far as the availability of it. And they do look at, pre-sales and the percent of deposit. So those ratios and matrices really haven't changed too much. On the rental side, I actually think the construction financing has got a little bit easier to obtain. They tend to be more aggressive, both on pricing and on the loan to values. So on the rental side, it's probably gotten better over the last year.
I would agree with that on rental as well.
Kobi, are developers still coming to you requesting your architectural designs for new projects yet to be built, or is that tapered off?
Yeah. No, nobody's coming to me anymore. So if anybody is looking for an architect, my cell number is. No, that's a good. Look, I came to Florida because I came from the Rust Belt from the Midwest. I came to Florida. There was no work in Miami, so I was working in the Caribbean, doing all-inclusive resorts and hotels in the Caribbean. And then something happened in 1994 where work started to come around in renovation and restoration of buildings in Miami, and not only Miami, in Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach. But what happened is now that, and I see it continuously steady, people are not going crazy. They're not jumping and saying, oh, here's the money, go design. They come to the office, they look at the designs, they want cutting edge designs. They want spaces that make it unique inside, they want spaces that make it unique outside. So it's much more somber and it's much more realistic. There is no, if you will, craziness. Everything has to be justified. Whether it's creating a public spaces outside the building or public spaces inside the building, whether it's creating the speed of the elevators, everything is much more cohesive. So I am continuing to see steady flow, which makes me personally feel comfortable. My mentality is, if you see a river that it moves quietly, then the river is deep. And if you see water move, it makes a lot of noise and a lot of white bubbles, it's usually quite shallow. So I feel comfortable with it, and I feel good about it. And I'm seeing and it's not just condominiums or the rental apartments that we're doing. It's even affordable housing, single-family residential in Fort Lauderdale as well throughout.
I definitely want to talk about affordable housing because I think it is a real issue in Broward County and throughout South Florida. But Carolyn, let me first ask you, when the cycle takes its next turn, and we generally go into a recession in this country every 7 to 10 years. We're now 7 years removed from the last one. Do you think that Broward will be affected before or after Miami? And is Broward more vulnerable than Miami?
It's a very interesting question. I would love to tell you that Broward would never be affected. I can't. Real estate is a cycle, as we know. There have been many opportunities, I believe, going in from your overall dollar price point now, you're in a far better position. If you have not purchased at what's considered the top of the market, I know we've all discussed this evening, the pinnacle of, we're really at the start of our growth session in Broward County, and there's such an upside that if you're purchasing perhaps 2 or 3 years from now, you may be in a far greater risk position in terms of your dollar value. But keep in mind, Jack, you've seen the cycles as well. Everything comes back. It comes back differently, and it's about how much you're going to ride that wave. A lot of people made a lot of money during this last cycle for all the people that lost, and a lot of new investors came to the table and purchased a lot of property that we resold to another buyer that
Right, if you got in and out by 2006, you did extremely well, but if you, like a lot of folks did, thought that it was never going to end and
Absolutely.
you increased your real estate holdings, we've seen a lot of folks that have suffered through that. I do want to talk about affordable housing because I think it's going to be a real issue in Broward County and South Florida in the near future. Florida International University did a study recently that showed there is a need and demand for 45,000 more affordable housing units in Broward County. University of Florida also did a study where they used even a higher portion of people's gross income could go towards housing. They came up and said that there's a need for 30,000 affordable housing units right now. We know a lot of people are struggling out there and they're paying anywhere from 35, even upwards of 50% of their income towards their housing expenses. And we're nearing a point again where it may be difficult. A lot of people may have to leave the area because while our costs are going up for real estate, our incomes actually have been declining. And now, for example, in Broward County, the median household income is about $50,000. Now, if you just look at simple rule of thumb economics, generally you should not be in a home any more than 4 times at the most, really 3 to 3.5, but 4 times what your income is. That means we need a lot of product that is $200,000 and below. Back in the old days, it used to be that the banks would allow 28% of your gross monthly income to go towards your housing payment and 36% of your gross to go towards your house payment and any other credit card debts. There's a lot of people nowadays that just simply would not qualify, especially for the new construction. Now, I know related and that's where Mr. Perez got his start, was actually in affordable rentals. I know that he's, and you guys have got a whole division now and are going strong at working at affordable housing, but I'd like to ask you guys, do you think this is an issue, and do you plan to try and do anything for affordable housing in the future?
I'll start with the last question, which is easiest, which right now I have no plans to do anything in affordable housing because it's a different marketplace and I don't know that as well as those that do from a private standpoint. However, I am involved in some of the municipal efforts towards affordable housing. And a couple of things you just said are a little bit misleading. First of all, affordable housing isn't reliant upon, although home ownership is part of it, rental is a big part of affordable housing. And at all levels, from the workforce housing to affordable housing, as qualified by HUD and other levels, we have enough housing in Broward County, enough housing stock to satisfy the population growth at those needs. The problem is at the next level of that index, which is when you calculate what people pay for housing and transportation, how much that starts to cost, because the affordable housing isn't necessarily accessible to public transportation and isn't necessarily downtown Fort Lauderdale or within walking distance of work, so people need cars and people need to drive. That change is happening greatly in Broward County for the first time. We're seeing between the localized projects like the Wave in Fort Lauderdale, all aboard Florida coming more south, as well as some of the east-west projects that are coming in. You're going to find more opportunities for affordable housing throughout the county that actually fit the lifestyle and demographics where people are living now, and not forcing people to move out of their way to be able to find an affordable spot. So while I agree that we do need help and we do need to work on it, it's not nearly as alarmist as I think you just came across.
Scott, what do you think?
I actually think that the difficulty in obtaining mortgage financing has been creating great strength in the multifamily housing market. In the last week, I've read Multifamily Executive or Multifamily News ranking Fort Lauderdale in the top 10 markets for rental growth for 2015. A lack of mortgage financing or a lack of availability of good credit to be able to buy a home, particularly at a lower price point, is putting people into apartments. Great apartments are being built all over the county that is serving that demand. So I actually believe that we're continuing to serve that segment through the development of great urban multifamily housing properties.
Okay. Mike, you guys are doing a lot of affordable housing now. What's your take?
Well, I guess I have several thoughts on this. One, most of the government programs target the very low income, which is below 50%, or the low income, which is below 80%. There's really not too many programs out there that target that 80 to 150% of median. So that tends to be the market that's, in my mind, the most underserved. Granted, we could always choose more of the low end, more for the low and the very low. And the other problem that we face is that Broward County and Miami-Dade County are basically built out for the most part, so there's not a lot of green land. It's much cheaper to build in suburbia on green land than it is in these urban locations. The higher density you build, the more expensive your construction costs are. But that's the reality, and that's where we're at today. And actually, that's what we want to do, especially for the low income and the moderate low income, is to put them in places in close proximity to jobs. So we do want them in the urban area, but it does take more of a subsidy because, again, it's more expensive to build in the urban locations.
It's extremely difficult to put that debt stack together and still make a fair profit when you try to attempt to service the affordable housing segment.
Most of our deals are layered with many different layers of subsidies and sources of funding to make the deals work.
Kobi, I'm going to get to some audience questions in about 5 minutes, but I just have one more question for Kobi and for Carolyn. Did you approach your work for the Four Seasons in Fort Lauderdale any differently than you might have if it would have been in Miami?
Yes, we did. And again, it relates to the uniqueness of the destination. For example, the Four Seasons in Surfside has to do with the historic building and the 900 feet on the ocean, whereby in Fort Lauderdale, we had an opportunity, for example, that does not exist anywhere else in the Western world, which is the marina and the boat life that we have. We try to do some things like that in Dubai. But there's nothing compared to the marine life from a boat standpoint that exists, where really people have invested so much money and time in these beautiful vessels, which are beautifully designed and appointed and maintained, and how that relates, if you will, to that location destination had something to do with it from a design standpoint and from an imagery standpoint. Okay. And it goes back to the days of the Yankee Clipper, when Marilyn Monroe used to come and hang out there. And you look at the history in the black and white pictures, and that's really when you start to see again the depth of the opportunity in Broward County. For me, it's not just a destination between South Beach and the breakers. For me, the opportunities west and east from a design and from an imagery and history in Broward County are immense.
Carolyn, last one's for you, and then I'm going to open it up for audience questions. what projects are the brokers that you work with on the Master Brokers Forum in Broward County? Which ones seem to be creating the most buzz, that people are the most excited about?
I'm not sure I can isolate that in this room and still perhaps do business with everybody else in this room.
Well, these are other people, what they're telling you.
That's a fair answer. There are a lot of projects. There are what's wonderful in our real estate world today, it's getting more competitive. And because of this, the new amenities, the branding awareness, it's creating a different reach. So I think buyers that are our brokers, we're very fortunate at Master Brokers. We've had some wonderful events in very different environments. Our most recent event at Auberge was spectacular, directly on the sand. We're all very excited about the Four Seasons and the rebirth of Conrad and the ocean there, and Paramount, of course, was always the signature staple. Now it's just who's next on the block. So we're looking forward to, and we all talk about where we're bringing our buyers. We all talk about what their experience is. We talk about potential new introduction of resort residences, the rebirth of the condominium hotel concept. But really, we're also long awaiting downtown. There hasn't been a downtown project. So I think that there's been a lot of excitement for different reasons among our brokers.
Interesting. Okay, very good. Okay, we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left for audience questions. Anybody have a question for one of our panelists? Yes, sir.
Speaking of boating, do you see any of the potential buyers coming to the market requesting developments that have more of a dry dock or a connected marina? From a developer standpoint, is land simply too expensive to really take that much space to create something like that? And are you being asked to design things of that nature in Broward County? Because as parking in any urban area, that's going to start running out very quickly.
We are, and we're doing so. We've been doing so in Miami. For example, 400 Sunny Isles has a dry dock next to it. But specifically in Fort Lauderdale, the demand is greater. It's wider, it's more unique, and it goes from Dania Beach, if you will, to the Fort Lauderdale River, in that whole area. So you have a vast, great opportunity to create that. And it does not necessarily mean that the dock is by your apartment or by your condo, but it could be a couple of blocks down, but it's not far away. And so I see a lot of unique opportunities like that we're working on and designing right now.
Spanish design was very popular. Lately, it seems to be very contemporary, almost square boxes. What do you envision the next design, the next hot look?
That's a very deep question. And Nick is listening very closely, and I'm not going to tell you, no. But seriously, the opportunities to create contemporary designs are greater now than they have been in a long time. I'm by education and by birth, I'm a modernist. The traditional architecture, though, fetches a lot of money per square foot, whether you're in Palm Beach or you're on Fisher Island. High numbers. But also tradition with contemporary is kind of unique. You have these opportunities, again, which makes it very nice in the neighborhoods in Fort Lauderdale. You have the neighborhoods of the single-family residential, which have very nice architecture. You have historic buildings. And you take that river and you take other locations, and even contemporary building like the Yankee Clipper, which were built in the 50s and 60s, and you try to work off of those and use we try to use those as a DNA and the inspiration for the buildings that we work with. We don't want to end up with we want to have a style that relates to the context of the neighborhood, the history of the community. And that's what can also help make buildings different. Look, buildings for me are like people. Inside, we're all the same. Hopefully, we all have the same mechanism and the same hearts and lungs, and hopefully we all have all the parts there, and they all fit very compact and very efficiently. But on the outside, we're all different, all completely different. Even two kids, my two boys are day and night from each other, the same mother, same father, to the best of my knowledge, with the same DNA. But they're completely different. And buildings are like that, or at least the buildings that we strive to design. So even if we create a bunch of buildings together, we try to have them somewhat different. So all of a sudden you don't look up and you go, oh my God, they're all the same, they just repeated the same plan, right? So that's what we try to do.
To hit on what Carolyn said earlier about having for sale product, thank you, to having for sale product in the urban core. I mean, in high-rise construction at 200 plus a foot, and land and profit and sales and marketing, you got to sell a high-rise condo for 400 plus a foot to lift a job. So how do you get, and that's a 1,200 square foot unit, it's $500,000. So how do we get affordable, not affordable, but like reasonably priced, taking the millennials out of their apartments and into for sale product when we kind of have this yin and yang with construction costs and development where you can't deliver a product that these millennial kids that want to stay and buy can afford?
I actually would love to take a stab at answering that question. So I think it's interesting. The millennials, while we spend all of this time, and I think even the tourist industry is spending so much time marketing to the millennials, and I don't believe that they're our buyer today. I think they may be buyers for potential condominium conversions that Related will do on some of their projects, hopefully. I think from a next level up, that you're building residences that are not 1,200 square feet. They're going to be slightly larger. Buyers will pay well more than $400 a foot for that level and to be in that location in this market. Urban, non-water, there hasn't been anything new. There has been no opportunity. You want to be downtown Los Angeles, you want to walk, I mean, everything that's even stretched west on Los Angeles, there hasn't been an opportunity to have a residence that's of decent size that you can move to. So I believe there is a depth of market that has not been explored.
If I can build on that a little bit, I agree greatly with what you said, but part of that is no one building can do that. We can't build a building in the middle of nowhere at that price, at least in downtown Fort Lauderdale, and be able to do it. But what's changing and the number of projects that are coming in and the scale of what's happening downtown, it's going to be attractive to more and more people. And you're right, the millennial straight out of college isn't going to come and buy the condominium, but that's never been who the homeowner is. There'll be the renters who into the rental buildings that are built alongside that, but you're going to see that off the water isn't necessarily going to be a negative. And I'm the biggest believer in the pluses of being on the water, and Fort Lauderdale has always been developed along the water and the riverways, and that's one of the unique elements of the city, which is why the downtown core isn't as much as it is elsewhere. It's spread out. The property values and the wealth along the river is not coming out from a single core. You're going to see over the next several years that start to change near Los Olas and near Flagler Village. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with results.
Yeah, the lack of the first-time home buyer, there's no really good foundation for the first-time home buyer, even though rents are low. I mean, it's cheaper to own versus rent, and interest rates are low, and you still don't have a foundation for these first-time home buyers, so it's affecting the move-up market. Most recoveries usually always have first-time buyers out buying, and this recovery doesn't have it. And how do you think it might affect it going forward?
Well, that hasn't been what's driven the marketplace. That certainly is part of the sales we've seen. It might not be a 22-year-old buying their first home, it might be a 30-year-old, but we're definitely seeing first-time home buyers in the marketplace. I'm seeing it at my project, and anecdotally I'm seeing it across the board. It might not be with the beachfront multi-million-dollar condominium, but across the board there are opportunities for that, and we are seeing first-time home buyers take advantage of it, and I suspect Scott's got more insight on this than I do.
Well, we build apartments nationally, and the millennials are certainly one of the most sought-after demographics for rental housing. Renters actually, millennials that can afford to purchase, even knowing that it's more expensive to rent than purchase, are still opting to rent in lieu of purchasing. There's been a really significant demographical mindset and change over the last several years. We've seen a rapid decline in U.S. home ownership rates from peaking up to about 69%, dropping down to projected lows around as much as 61%. At the same time, we've seen a lot of new household formations. We see a completely different mentality. People aren't looking to get a job and build a career with one company for a long time. You have so much that's driven by technology these days, and young entrepreneurs made up of the creative and the millennial classes that really have one foot out the door with a perception that they're going to be the next founder of Facebook. So the idea of having flexibility, mobility, connectivity to be within great urban areas and environments is keeping a very robust multifamily housing market. And I don't really think that we need to be looking nationally to try and fill any void, because even if the demand were there, the mortgage financing isn't there. And I don't think that I believe we're probably several years away from seeing that change for a domestic purchaser.
Interesting comment. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending the Broward Development Program.